Welcome to Emtron Training Part 10. In this training tutorial, we're going to be taking a look at setting up our digital inputs. Our digital inputs are things like wheel speed sensors or a switched input that's set as a digital. Also, an ethanol content sensor are very common examples of working with and setting up our digital inputs. We're going to take a look at how to do all of that in our training tutorial. Let's jump in so we can check this out. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to be taking a look at setting up digital inputs in our Emtron system. Now, our digital inputs can be a variety of different things. We might be dealing with a switched digital input where we're trying to turn on a toggle switch or be able to turn something on. We'll find that we can utilize a digital input in order to accomplish this. If we're dealing with something like a vehicle speed or wheel speed sensors, they're going to be a variable pulsed input, having a certain amount of frequency or a certain amount of pulses in a given sampling of time. That'll determine what the speed threshold is going to be as long as we configure everything in our Emtron. And then finally, we're going to be dealing with and taking a look at something like a flex fuel sensor. Flex fuel sensors will be outputting a certain frequency or certain number of pulses in a given period of time in order to relay what the ethanol content is going to be measured within our fuel system. If we're dealing with a ethanol-based type of fuel calibration strategy, we definitely want to go and have a flex fuel sensor so we can track what that is doing. So we're going to be taking a look at these common examples here and setting them up. It's actually pretty straightforward, but there are a lot of specific details that we need to know. So let's go and start to talk about that. Let's start to take a look at some things. We're going to go in here from our tuning side. We're going to jump into our configure area. And if we go here from our engine setup and walk our way across here under channels, we'll go to input setup. And this is where we're going to be finding how to set up the various types of digital inputs. Let's talk about that real quick here in the beginning, and then we'll move into go and doing the actual configuration and setup details for working with our digital inputs. Now, we'll find that we have essentially two different types of digital inputs. One would be just a single pulse on or off. This will be when we're dealing with a switched input, a switched digital input. So if we're dealing with a toggle switch, clutch switch, whatever the case may be in terms of turning something on or off, we can utilize a digital input, and we can have two different ways we can format that, a low side or a high side. We'll talk about that in 1 minute. The other way that we can deal with a digital input is going to be something like speed sensor, whether it's vehicle speed or wheel speed sensor. We're going to be varying the amount of pulses over a given sample of time, and we'll find if we have more pulses, that means we're traveling at a faster rate or having a faster RPM, or if we're having less pulses, that means that we're going slower, whether it's RPM or speed that we're measuring in that particular channel. So we need to configure the pulse type of input in the calibration strategy. It's actually relatively simple to do that. I'm going to illustrate that here in a little bit in order to make sure that that channel is registering the pulses correctly and interpreting that data so that when we're looking at the actual channel, so something like a speed sensor, we're not looking at a frequency of just pulses coming in. We're actually converting that into mile per hour, or in the case of turbo speed, you might be measuring how quickly the turbine wheel and the compressor wheel are spinning. That would be a RPM measurement and not necessarily a speed measurement, not mile per hour, but actually revolutions per minute. So a little bit differentiation in terms of how things would be potentially configured, but those are going to be the two different types or different ways we can deal with our digital inputs. Now, we're going to also be taking a look at setting up a flex fuel sensor very quickly towards the end of the video. That is the other way that we can work with and deal with a digital input. Flex fuel sensors will have that same kind of idea where it sends a certain amount of pulses in a certain period of time, and it's going to be between 50 to 150 hertz, and depending on what the ethanol content is registering and reading in our fuel system, it'll send out a different frequency or a different amount of pulses so the ECU can interpret it based on that, whatever that sensor is registering and reading. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. That's probably the easiest thing to set up and configure. It's just a matter of toggling a few things on. But let's first dig in here and learn how to set up a digital switched input. So last video, when we're taking a look at our analog inputs, we learned how to configure a switched analog input. This is going to be a little bit different in terms of the digital input. So let's dig in here and look at that. So right now I'm in my switch window here. So these tabs here, just to briefly go over this again, these tabs are going to be combining like things that we might want to configure and set up here. So under engine, majority of these things here are going to be an analog type of input that we might want to work with, and they're all related to an engine-specific calibration and tuning. So looking here, things like engine oil temperature, or mass airflow meter, or a lambda sensor, or engine coolant temperature, that's all related to engine operation. We can see here, this is related to vehicle. Thanks for checking out our teaser clip. If you want to see the rest of this video and more than 500 hours of current EFI training we have to offer, make sure you click right here. If you want to go and check out more teaser clips from this training course, click here, and you don't want to miss any of the videos we're going to be releasing on this channel, so make sure you subscribe and click here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.